huge religious freedom victory. Or is it? The Supreme Court upholds a right of Catholics to refuse adoption to homosexual couples. Brent Hanes, attorney and legal analyst, is on to discuss what implications this has for the country and the church.
All 9 of the justices agreed. Like, when does that ever happen? In the history of Supreme Court cases, I would love to know the count of how many cases where they all agreed. I'm looking at an article out of the Epoch Times here, but Brent, I'd love you to tell us what the details are.
Well, it was a good victory, Joe. It's good when you get a victory where all of the Supreme Court agrees.
Like, how often does that happen?
It happens more often than you might think, but
I would think it's rare.
Well, no, but here's the catch, Joe. Although this is a very good victory, the reason it's a unanimous 9-0 victory is it's not a great victory. It's not a foundational victory. This does not let people who are concerned about religious freedom rest easy. One of the major Supreme Court news sites, it's called SCOTUS blog, if anyone wants to look it up, had a headline that basically described this as a narrow victory. And that's why even the liberal justices joined with the conservative justices in this
So
case.
how is it a narrow victory then?
That's a good question, and it shows you also how the courts will usually analyze decisions and reach decisions. So the city of Philadelphia told Catholic Social Services, you can't participate in our program anymore because you refuse to place children in homes where the same-sex couples are married. And also, Catholic Social Services said, we don't place children in homes where it's a heterosexual couple, but they're not married.
Right.
So, and Catholic Social Services said, look, that we would be endorsing that relationship that violates our religious beliefs. Catholic Social Services have been doing this for about half a century, of course, and there hadn't been any problems. No gay couple, married or otherwise, had asked for a placement from Catholic Social Services. So the issue that goes up to the Supreme Court ultimately is the wording of the contract between the city of Philadelphia and Catholic Social Services and the wording of a city ordinance that bans discrimination, essentially. And so what happened was all 9 justices said Philadelphia loses because essentially of the wording of the contract and also that city ordinance doesn't help you. 3 of the justices, Alito, Thomas, and I'll come back to the other one in a moment here. But 3 of the justices wanted to reach the bigger question, which is a constitutional question, and say, we need to revisit our case law on U.S. Supreme Court religious exercise decisions. But even Amy Coney Barrett, our new Catholic star on the Supreme Court in the eyes of many, and she is a brilliant jurist, she said in a separate opinion, we don't have to reach that decision because we can decide this on these other issues. Now, this is a traditional and time-honored way of reaching decisions. If a court, any court, has a dispute in front of it, and it can reach a decision that disposes of that case by considering a statute instead of a constitutional decision, they always go for the statute. It's sort of a form of being as minimally invasive as possible.
Interesting.
And that's why the liberal justices on the Supreme Court voted with the conservatives. And the reason Catholic Social Services won is under U.S. Supreme Court precedent and under the case that the other 3 justices wanted to revisit, and the conservatives wanted the Supreme Court to overrule. It's called Employment Division of Oregon versus Smith. And this is the famous, some of your listeners might recognize this as the famous peyote case. Parole officer in Oregon wanted to smoke peyote as part of his religious ritual. Case went up to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1995, our hero, Justice Antonin Scalia, wrote the opinion and actually said, no, you lose. You don't get your religious freedom on this issue. And the rationale of the court under Justice Scalia's opinion was This is a law that is generally applicable, and it is neutral. In other words, it's just a general law. It applies to everybody. And it's illegal to smoke peyote. It's not targeted at Native Americans because he is of Native American descent. It's not targeted at religious practitioners. It's just an illegal drug. You don't get to get around these laws because otherwise, government would be too difficult. Having all these different laws and making religious accommodations would be too difficult. You lose. Well, the problem is, as good as that seemed in 1995, we've seen in the last quarter of a century plus all of these attacks on religious liberty. And we saw this, of course, in Philadelphia. The reason Catholic Social Services won, first, the three conservatives wanted to go back and say, hey, we love you, Justice Scalia, but you were wrong on that. They wanted to say, look, you must give a waiver, basically, to religious people under the First Amendment. And in the law, we would call that an accommodation. You must give a waiver unless the government has a compelling interest, and what they're doing is the narrowest possible way of achieving that compelling interest. If you don't, you got to figure out some way to accommodate religious people. Three justices said, we need to go back and make that the law and overrule the peyote case from Oregon.
Wow.
But all of the justices looked at it, including the liberal justices, which is why this is a 9-0 victory. They looked at that and said, you know what? There's another aspect of our law where the city of Philadelphia loses. And remember, I said that in 1995, Justice Scalia in the court said, well, the law has to be neutral and generally applicable. Well, they looked at that. They looked at their law and said, our decision before has said, if you have a law, or in this case, a contract with the government, and you provide for waivers or individual exemptions, or the other legal phrase, accommodations in some circumstances, you can't say that this is a general neutral law, because you're obviously in some circumstances hearing individual appeals and making accommodations. And that alone, on that narrow technical ground, caused the city to lose.
Wow. So this is definitely, I had a glimmer of hope here. Boston stopped the helping place kids in homes many years ago because of this same-sex issue, and I was hoping that this might lead to them being able to come back and do that again. But you're saying that is not the case.
That's a very perceptive question, Joe, because it would depend on how the Boston ordinance or the Boston contract with social service agencies or Massachusetts law is worded. Yeah. And a good example of that.
And I meant Catholic Charities in Boston is what I was referring to.
But any religious auxiliary or any religiously motivated organization, we see exactly how this happens, what this leads to with what happened just 3 days ago on Tuesday. Everybody by now who listens to Catholic radio and who follows religious liberty issues knows the name Jack Phillips, the famous Colorado baker. God bless him.
The perpetual defendant.
He was back in court again, and he lost. Now, there was a great victory at the Supreme Court in 2018, or I would say a very good victory, because that case went up from Colorado where they said, look, you have to bake cakes for gay weddings. That was a narrow victory in 2018 because what happened in Colorado was their Human Rights Commission was on record saying anti-religious statements. They articulated their anti-religious beliefs. And that's, if you want to discriminate against religious people, that's just a stupid thing to do. Mm-hmm. And the court said, look, you manifested hostility to religion. You were obviously targeting him for religious purposes. He basically didn't get a fair hearing. It's not a fair law. And they threw it out. Well, all Colorado did and the people in Colorado did was go back and try again without articulating that religious animosity. In fact, a lawyer wanted him to bake a sexual transition cake, and during the course of the Supreme Court lawsuit, that lawyer initiated that process and asked for the cake, and that's why he was back in court and lost again. So we're winning these cases at the Supreme Court. It's good that we're winning. We have won some other important victories in recent years, But these are not what you might consider philosophical or jurisprudential or constitutional level victories.
Well, on the Masterpiece Cake case, why are they so gung-ho to get after Jack Phillips? Why do they feel like the need to try again to take him down?
Well,
2 minutes.
He is just a target they have chosen. He is not the only one. It's not an accident. This case didn't arise by accident. It is what lawyers would call a test case. The first one was Elaine Huguenin, a photographer in New Mexico, who had the exact same situation where two gay women came and said, "We want you to photograph our wedding." She said, "I'm a Christian. I can't do that." And the Supreme Court refused to take that case. That went all the way up to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and she lost. Arlene's Flowers is another famous case from the state of Washington. Wedding services are major targets because this is an issue central to the activist and legal efforts of the gay community in recent years. And of course, we had the Supreme Court decision to recognize gay marriage. So people who engage in the wedding business are particularly visible, and they are particularly prominent targets. So Jack Phillips, who bakes wedding cakes, Arlene, the owner of Arlene's Flowers in Washington, wedding photographers, anybody like that is a potential target. So we have a good victory at the U.S. Supreme Court. We don't have, a foundational philosophical victory.
So not a lot of celebration going on today because of this big headline that's out there. But at any rate, we'll take the victories as we can get them. Brent Hanes, attorney, Catholic speaker, and political analyst. Thank you for your time today. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you, Joe.
If you like that interview, be sure to check out some of our other interviews and like and subscribe, and make sure to share this interview with anyone that you think would find this edifying, informative, or inspiring. God love you.